In the Shafi'i madhab, they say the wife is not obligated to obey the husband, but the Hanafis say otherwise. What is the ruling according to the Quran and the Sunnah? Well, they both can be interpretations of the Quran and the Sunnah. So, so I don't know if that's the Shafi'i madhab. You'd have to ask someone who's actually qualified to explain the positions of the Shafi'i school, i.e. a Shafi'i. But in in the Hanafi school, the wife is obliged to obey the husband in things that are not going to be harmful to her or humiliating, right? So, for example, she wants to go out or whatever. He's responsible for her. He's responsible for her safety. He's responsible for, her well-being overall. And she just, if she goes out without him knowing, if she comes under any sort of harm or whatever, which it does happen, then it's on him. He has to answer before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even within, Islam has this understanding of, with both spouses, there's a codependency. And so the husband provides the material, the food, clothing, shelter, these sorts of things, and he provides the strength and support and the what's the other word? The dependency, dependableness. Her dependency is taken out. Security, that's the word. The husband does this. He is obliged to work and support the family in this case, right? And then so she's dependent on him for that. But then if you're doing that, there's only so much you can do to actually just function otherwise. Then on the other side, the wife is there, they're both there for each other to fulfill each other's physical needs of intimacy, which is more than just physical. It's also companionship and all these things. So they depend on each other like that. And then the wife's there, where she is obliged to cook and she is obliged to clean and to look after the children, right? And any faqih who's I've heard of fuqaha, of people saying, oh, I heard so and so saying that she doesn't have to cook. What the books of the Hanafi school, at least, I believe the others will say this as well, right? But what they say is that there's a distinction between certain rulings, qada'an and diyanatan. So the issue is, can a judge enforce it or not? So the husband has to provide for the wife. He has to buy clothes for the wife, food for the wife, these sorts of things. If he doesn't, can a judge enforce it? Yes, he can. He can throw him into a prison cell. Or he can, it won't work in the West as it is, or the judge can say to the wife, you go, buy what you need, and it's on him. He has to pay it. And through a court order. But is a judge going to come into the house and breathe down her neck? Why aren't you cutting the onions? Right? No, he can't. He can't do that. Right? But for the wife, does she have to cook? Yes. Right? Because that's where the codependency is going to come from. And then that's why the fuqaha say that she has to cook and clean. And otherwise she'll be answerable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when are you answerable to Allah? When you avoid something, when you don't do something, it's when the action is wrong, right? So there is this codependency on both regards. What was the actual question? How do I get here? Oh yeah. So part of this, when something comes and disrupts that codependency, that's when you get issues, right? And it doesn't mean like the spouse can't work or other aspects like that. No, as long as they can make it work and it doesn't, one's personal rights are not affected by the behavior of the other person, it's permissible, right? It's fine. If the husband says, fine, you can go do this and whatever, and it's permissible. If he says, fine, you can step out whenever you want, it's perfectly fine. But then the issue of the obedience and whatever, yeah, it's there in the Hanafi school. And لا يصلح الناس فوضى لا صراط لهم. The ancient Arabs knew this, that people don't thrive in situations of fawda, like literally no leadership, right? And there has to be like even the traditional understanding, like the head of a household or something, there has to be someone who's responsible for the the decisions, and responsible to face the consequences of those decisions, right? And so there is, الرجال قوامون على النساء, the Quran says that men are the protecting caretakers over ladies, بما فضل الله به بعضهم على بعض, because of what Allah has, the superiority Allah has given one group to over the other, men over the women, and because of what they spend, they spend on them, they provide for their female relatives. So there is this thing, and and then what you see is a lot of it comes from the narrative of the Western liberated woman. And what you see, practically speaking, when people drink the Kool-Aid in that situation, and they end up that codependency is lost. And then what does the Quran say? Right? إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى أَن رَآهُ اسْتَغْنَى. Indeed, the human being crosses limits when he thinks he has no need of God, right? That's the context of the surah. But it applies in everything else in life. How many times, I was once teaching a student about this verse, and I said, he's a young teenage lad, maybe 14 years old. I said, he had this pen, it was an old pen, Bic or something. I said, if I gave you a fancy new pen, what would you do with the old pen? He said, I'd chuck it in the bin. I said, would you gently go and drop it in? He goes, no, with force. I said, that's what the quality being described here. When a person thinks they have no need of the other, then all this, the behavior and the treatment causes issues. And so there's a codependency. And honestly, like there's a lot of good and barakah that comes from having a codependency understanding, but understanding that there's a hierarchy. And what people excuse me, what people don't understand in the modern world, that life's not always about yourself, and sometimes living in a way that is of service of others is one of the huge gifts Allah gives to a person, that one of the means of getting closer to Allah. Bishr al-Hafi, this great wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he surpassed everyone of his time. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to him in a dream, and he said, "O Bishr, do you know how you've surpassed everyone of your time?" He said, he said, by following my sunnah, by having your deep concern for your brethren, your friends and people, wanting the best for them. And then, well, that might have been 3, and then number 2 was your service of the righteous, just serving righteous people. And this is the same thing we know with say a practicing Muslim family, that the husband's working to provide, as a service, right? The lady looking after the family, the home, even if she works, whatever, that's a service, right? And so this let's go back to the main point, but that's how he rose. So anyway, let's go back to this point of, yes, obedience. Yes, it's there in the school, and it is the understanding that you get from the Quran and the Sunnah. And when it's understood in its proper form, it's actually a really beautiful concept, and it's the way people are meant to be. And then when people shift away from it, there's always a loss. There's always a loss, right? And why do you think in the 80s and 90s there was a break, or even earlier, there was the standard nuclear family they had in the West, and all the TV shows had the mum and the dad and then the children, and then it started moving away, where that wasn't the case. And then now you have the TV shows, and there's 2 fathers, and there's 3 mothers, and all sorts of stuff going on, simply because of this, because those values. And not only that, all of these LGBTQ issues that have come out, right? It doesn't, if they haven't been happening for as long as people can remember in the way they're happening now, then something's changed. And I once read something written by a Muslim lady, and she said that her lesbian tendencies started coming out at a particular age, and that's around the same time, she said, as my suicidal tendencies occurred as well. Well, can't you see a correlation? Right, whatever's pushed you into feeling suicidal has also, brought out this as a defense mechanism, a coping mechanism for whatever's, been happening. So that's just it. So I hope that answers it. But generally, yes, that is the case, and that's what you'll get. And at the same time, there's this understanding that the husband would have as well, like related to the previous answer on violence, striking, that Allah is above everyone, not literally, not in a physical sense, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just like, for the husband to think, well, I can dominate her through violence or force. Well, guess who you're gonna have to stand before on the Day of Judgment. And and likewise, with the wife, she has to stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. And when when this was an understood element in society, I won't say the Muslim world, about this codependency, it's families and thrived. And codependency doesn't mean equality in every way. On a spiritual level, بعضكم من بعض, the Quran says, you stem from one another. Everyone has male and female ancestors, so you're all equal in that regard. But the role that you're given in the dunya, yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put men in charge, but there's a responsibility that comes with that as well. It's not just a case of here you got free reign to do what you want. They're all slaves underneath you. It's not like that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah.